The town of Herafield sat at the edge of the Blackwood Forest the way a man stands too close to a cliff, aware of the drop, unwilling to step back. Population 412, as of last Tuesday. As of that particular Thursday morning, 409. 3 people had not made it through the week. Their names were on Eleanor Voss's notepad before she even crossed the county line. She pulled her rental car off the road and onto the gravel lot beside Miriam's in at 3:30 in the afternoon. The sky above Herafield was the color of pewter, and the rain came down in thin, steady curtains that made the tree line at the edge of town look even darker than it probably was. Eleanor told herself it probably was not as dark as it looked. She was good at telling herself things. She checked her phone out of habit. No signal. She had not had a signal since she turned off the interstate 40 minutes earlier. She left a voicemail for her brother anyway, listening to the recording tone and speaking clearly into the quiet car. "Tom, it's me," she said. "I got your message. I don't know why the county coroner called you instead of the state office, but I'm here. I'm at the inn. Call me back." She paused, watching the rain trace lines down the window glass. "And Tom, whatever you think you saw, there's an explanation. There always is." She ended the call and set the phone on the seat beside her. A knock on the driver's window made her straighten up sharply. A man in a sheriff's deputy uniform stood in the rain, his jacket soaked through to the collar, water running from the brim of his hat. He was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with the look of a person who had not slept properly in several days. He raised one hand in what was meant to be a reassuring wave and mostly wasn't. Eleanor wound down the window. "Dr. Voss," the deputy said. "I'm Deputy Maddox. I'm real glad you made it before dark." Eleanor looked at her watch, then at the sky, then back at him. "It's 3 in the afternoon, deputy," she replied. "Yes, ma'am," Maddox said, without any apparent irony. "And dark comes fast out here this time of year." He opened her car door, and she stepped out into the rain, pulling her coat tight across her chest. She was 36 years old, 11 years into a career in forensic pathology, and she had investigated 84 unexplained deaths across 4 states. She was not, she reminded herself, the kind of person who found dark skies and nervous deputies unsettling. She was the kind of person who explained things. "You said 3 victims," she said, retrieving her bag from the back seat. "2 confirmed," Maddox told her, walking alongside her toward the inn's entrance. We haven't found all of the 3rd. Eleanor stopped walking. "Haven't found all of." "We've got the torso," Maddox said, and his voice remained professionally steady in a way that cost him something. "Some of the legs. The head, we found that up in a pine tree about 30 feet off the ground." He paused. "We don't know how." Eleanor turned and looked at the forest. It began where the road ended, a wall of black spruce and old oak with no sky visible between the crowded branches. Something moved inside it, a shadow shifting at the edge of her vision. She told herself it was a deer. "Who are the victims?" she asked, turning back. "Garrett Webb, 32, logging contractor," Maddox answered, counting on his fingers. "Louisa Peary, 29, schoolteacher. And Frank Halloran, 57, retired." "Any connection between them?" Eleanor asked. Maddox was quiet for a moment. "They all grew up here," he finally said. "They never left." Miriam's inn had 12 rooms, all of them empty. The owner, Miriam Stokes, was a small woman in her early 80s with white hair pinned severely at the back of her head and the kind of calm that comes not from peace of mind but from having already survived every kind of disaster. She set a pot of tea on the table without being asked, as if she had been expecting exactly this guest at exactly this hour. "You'll want the room on the end," Miriam told Eleanor, pouring without looking up. "Faces away from the woods. I give all my guests that room this time of year." Eleanor settled into the chair across from her. "Does that happen often?" she asked. "Guests who need to face away from the woods?" "In October?" Miriam replied. "Every year." Eleanor wrapped both hands around her teacup. The fire in the hearth at the far end of the room threw warm light across the old wooden walls, and under other circumstances, it would have been pleasant. "Mrs. Stokes," she said, "do you know what's killing these people?" Miriam set the teapot down and sat back in her chair. She did not look away, and she did not hesitate, which Eleanor noted with the same part of her brain that noticed everything. "My grandmother told me," Miriam said. Her grandmother told her. Every generation, someone from the old families doesn't make it through the blood moon. It's been that way since before this town had a name. "That's folklore," Eleanor said. Miriam looked at her with mild patience, the way one looks at a bright child who has arrived at the wrong answer. "That's history, Dr. Voss," she replied. "Folklore is what you call history when you don't want to believe it." The county morgue occupied the basement of a converted church 3 blocks from the inn. The fluorescent lights buzzed with the particular frequency of government institutions everywhere, and the smell was the smell Eleanor had worked in for 11 years, antiseptic over something that antiseptic never quite defeated. She pulled back the sheet on Garrett Webb and looked at what the forest had left of him. She was quiet for a long time. The wounds were unlike anything in her professional experience. The bone was not broken in the way bones break under impact. It was compressed and then scattered, as though something had gripped him with enormous force and then shaken. The lacerations were 6 inches wide at their deepest point. Eleanor measured them with a ruler, twice, to be sure. No animal native to this part of Pennsylvania had a jaw or a claw capable of producing a mark of that width. She clicked on her recorder and held it to her mouth. "Victim 1, male, early 30s, she dictated, keeping her voice neutral. "Cause of death, pending. Wound pattern inconsistent with known predatory wildlife in this region." She measured again, frowning. "Claw marks suggest a bipedal attacker with an approximately 22-inch hand span." She lowered the recorder. "That is not possible," she said quietly, to no one in particular. "Your brother is here," Maddox called from the doorway. Thomas Voss came in from the hallway, and Eleanor felt the small shock of it. He was thinner than she remembered, and that was wrong, because she had seen him 8 weeks ago, and he had been fine then. His eyes moved around the room without fully settling on anything, the way eyes move when a person is accustomed to watching for something. "Ellie," he said. "Tom." She looked at him steadily. "You look terrible." "I saw it," he said. "You told me in the message," she replied. "You said you saw." "Not an animal," Thomas said, cutting her off. His voice was quiet but certain. St. Agatha's was the oldest building in Herafield, though Father Donahue claimed the church itself predated the town, a distinction he made with the certainty of a man who had read the records and, Eleanor would later suspect, burned a portion of them. He was in his 70s, with white hair and large hands and the kind of face that had been kind once and was now something more complicated. He lit candles at the altar despite the functioning electric lights overhead. He did not explain why. Eleanor decided not to ask. "I've been waiting for someone to come and ask me," he said, touching the flame to the 3rd wick. 30 years I've been waiting." "Father," Eleanor said, "I'm a scientist. I'm not here for—" "I know what you are," Donahue said. "Sit down." She sat. He remained standing, which she noticed, and she decided to let it go. "In 1693, Donahue began, a man named Aldrich Voss settled on the land that is now Herafield. He came from the Harz Mountains of Germany. He brought with him his wife, his 3 sons, and something else. Something he had made a bargain with in the old country." "A bargain," Eleanor repeated. "He wanted to survive the crossing," Donahue explained. "He wanted his family to thrive in the New World. He wanted protection. And he received it." The forest watched over Herafield for generations. Floods that devastated other towns. Disease. Indian raids. None of it touched this place, not badly. He paused and looked at the candle flames. Other settlements in this valley were wiped out entirely. Herafield survived, year after year, generation after generation. "At what cost?" Eleanor asked. Donahue finally turned from the altar and sat in the front pew, lowering himself with the careful movements of a man whose joints had been carrying a weight for a very long time. "Every generation of the Voss bloodline," he said, "one is chosen. Not for death. For service. They become the guardian of the forest. The warden. They cross over, and they protect what they once were." "Become," Eleanor said. You mean? The werewolf is not a monster in the old tradition, Dr. Voss, Donahue told her. It is a transformation. A duty. The person you knew is still inside. But the beast has its own hungers. Its own logic. He folded his hands on his knees. The 3 people who died, they had each been making plans to sell their land to a developer from Philadelphia. A man who wanted to clear the northwest quarter of the Blackwood for a resort complex. Thomas, who had been quiet in the pew behind Eleanor, spoke softly. It protects the forest, he said. And the family, yes, Donahue agreed. Eleanor stood up. She could hear her own voice going flat in the way it did when she was keeping a larger reaction under careful control. This is insane, she said. You are a priest of the Catholic Church. You are telling me there is a werewolf living in that forest and you have done nothing, said nothing because you consider it some kind of ancestral guardian. I have done penance every day for 30 years for my silence, Donahue said evenly. That is the honest answer. Who is it? Eleanor asked. Who is who changed? Donahue looked past her to Thomas. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Eleanor turned around. Thomas was looking at his hands. He did not look up. The choosing is usually the youngest adult of the bloodline, Donahue said quietly. The fire in the altar candles flickered in a draft that came from nowhere. Tom, Eleanor said. I didn't know, Thomas said, still looking at his hands. I swear to you, Ellie, I didn't know until I looked at the photographs I took and I couldn't explain my own face in them. She sat at the table in the inn's common room with the photographs spread out in front of her. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the night had come down the way night comes down in forested places, completely, without gradation. The fire in the hearth had burned low. Miriam set a glass of whiskey at Eleanor's elbow without being asked. Eleanor had been looking at the photographs for 2 hours. She had been through 5 stages of denial in that time, and she was somewhere between bargaining and a cold, functional acceptance that felt less like belief and more like the closing of an argument. You knew, Eleanor said, without looking up. You've known the whole time. I knew it was one of the Voss line, Miriam replied, settling into the chair across from her. I didn't know it was your brother specifically until tonight. And you're calm about this, Eleanor said. It was not quite a question. I'm 81 years old, Dr. Voss, Miriam said. I've been calm about this since I watched my own father change, back in 1962. It does not get less strange. You simply run out of the energy to be hysterical. Eleanor picked up the whiskey glass, held it, and set it back down without drinking. Can it be stopped? She asked. Can he come back? The transformation is complete on the blood moon, Miriam told her. 3 days from now. Before that, before the moon is full, there is a way to break the binding. Tell me, Eleanor said. You have to find the original covenant, Miriam replied. The document Aldrich Voss signed when he made the bargain. It's buried in the forest, in the roots of the oldest oak. You bring it to the church. Father Donahue burns it. The binding ends. And my brother? Eleanor asked. Miriam was quiet for long enough that Eleanor looked up at her. He's been changing for 3 months, the old woman said carefully. During the new moon, the early stages. By now the forest has already started to accept him. When the binding breaks, he will be human again. But, Eleanor said. Miriam looked at the fire. The forest does not give up its wardens willingly, she said. Detective Parrish arrived from the state office before sunrise, which Eleanor took as a measure of how seriously the situation had risen through the chain of command. He was in his 50s, trim and precise, with the calm energy of someone who had managed large investigations and expected them to resolve properly if handled correctly. He was, Eleanor decided, immediately going to be a problem. The state is taking over the investigation, Dr. Voss, Parrish told her, setting his briefcase on the table in the station's small conference room. 3 homicides, wound patterns that have already circulated on a forensic evidence forum, and press vehicles expected by tomorrow morning. I need your findings. I need 2 more days, Eleanor replied. Parrish looked at her. I'm sorry, what exactly have you been doing here for the past 24 hours?
Working, she said.
Your report lists cause of death as pending, he told her. For all 3 victims. Because I don't have a complete picture of the mechanism yet, she replied. Dr. Voss, Parrish said, in the patient tone of a man who wanted to be reasonable and was finding it difficult. If there's a predatory animal operating in this area, we need to get fish and wildlife involved. We need to get a containment protocol. It isn't an animal, she said. Parrish waited. Then what is it? He asked. She looked at him across the table. She made a decision that was not comfortable to make. Give me 2 days, she said. If I don't have a resolution by the night of the 25th, the case is yours, unconditionally. Parrish tapped his pen against his notepad twice. 2 days, he agreed. And I'm not leaving town. The forest was different by day in the way that a difficult thing is different when you can see it clearly, not less frightening, but frightening in a more specific way. The trees were enormous and old in a manner that felt deliberate, as if they had been growing there for the purpose of growing there, and nothing else mattered. Sound stopped at the tree-line. No birdsong. No wind that reached the ground. No distant traffic or machinery. Just the deep, attentive quiet of a place that had been listening for a very long time. Eleanor and Thomas walked in with flashlights even in full daylight, a map drawn from Father Donohue's memory folded in Eleanor's coat pocket, and a folding trowel she had bought at the hardware store on the edge of town. I can feel it already, Thomas said, keeping his voice low, though there was no one to hear him. What does it feel like? Eleanor asked, and she asked it the way she asked questions in autopsies, clinically, wanting the honest answer even if the honest answer was unpleasant. Like being wanted, Thomas said. Like belonging somewhere. He was quiet for a moment. It doesn't feel bad, Ellie. That's the terrifying part. It feels like coming home. Don't romanticize it, Tom, she said. 3 people are dead. I know, he replied. I know. And I don't remember doing it. I don't remember anything from those nights. Just waking up in the grove with soil on my hands and this feeling of having been very, very large. They pushed deeper. The canopy closed above them, and the light changed, became amber and slow, filtered through centuries of layered leaves. The covenant document, Eleanor said, keeping them both focused. Donahue said it's under the oldest oak. Do you know which one? I think so, Thomas answered. There's one tree in the northeast quarter that I've always felt drawn to. Every time I came out here for the samples, I'd end up resting near it. I thought it was just a botanical instinct. It's genuinely one of the largest specimens I've ever documented. Now I think the pull was something else. Lead the way, she said. They walked for 40 minutes. At 10:52, Thomas stopped at the base of a white oak that was 5 feet across at the trunk. It had been growing since before any European hand had ever touched this continent, its bark deeply furrowed and dark with age, its roots rising out of the earth in great arching loops like the fingers of something vast that had been buried and was not entirely still. Here, Thomas said. Eleanor knelt at the base of the largest root loop and started digging. 3 inches down, the trowel blade struck something that was not stone. There's something here, she said. She worked carefully and extracted a metal box, corroded heavily on the outside but structurally intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow not rotted through 3 centuries of burial, was a single document. The writing was in Old German script, in ink the color of dried blood that had gone nearly black with age. What does it say? Thomas asked, crouching beside her. Eleanor read slowly, translating as she went. My German is mostly technical, but I, Aldrich Voss, give willingly from my line one soul in each generation, that the forest may endure, that my children may be protected, that the old powers be satisfied. She paused. And then a signature. And then, she stopped again, holding the document up to her light. Tom, this signature is not in ink. No, Thomas said quietly. It wouldn't be. The forest changed. It was not something Eleanor could describe exactly, and she would struggle with it later when she tried to write it down. There was a pressure change, like ascending in an airplane, and the quality of the silence shifted from passive to active, from a place that had been quiet to a place that had decided to be quiet, which was not the same thing at all. We need to leave, she said, standing. Now. The forest would not let them leave. This was the part of the story where Eleanor's rational framework began to fail, and she fought its failing the way she fought everything, methodically, with evidence. She told herself that the paths looked similar because the forest was dense and uniform. She told herself that the light was confusing her sense of direction. She told herself that they had simply lost their bearing and needed to use the compass on her phone, which she checked, and which spun without settling, which she told herself was a magnetic anomaly in the soil. She told herself all of these things for approximately 12 minutes, during which time they walked what should have been the entire width of the Blackwood twice over and arrived again at the center. "This is not possible," she said. "Ellie," Thomas said, and his voice had changed. It was very quiet. "Don't move." The sound came from between the trees 20 feet to their left. Not a footstep, something larger than a footstep. The compression of soil and dead leaves under a weight that was not built for standing still. Eleanor turned her head slowly. It was between the trees, and in the diffuse filtered light of the forest canopy, it was the shape of a man the way a shadow is the shape of the thing that cast it, approximate, suggestive, distorted. The proportions were wrong. The head sat too far forward. The shoulders were too broad and too high, and the arms were too long by a measure that Eleanor's mind refused to calculate. It was watching them with eyes that caught the light the way no human eyes did, a flat, cold, amber reflection, like the eyes of something that had always seen better in the dark. When it spoke, the voice was not a human voice. It was a human voice being produced by the wrong apparatus, like a song played on an instrument that was not designed for it. "Mine," it said. And then, after a pause that felt geological, "Sister." Eleanor closed her eyes. She held them closed for 3 seconds. When she opened them again, she was still a scientist and she was also a sister, and she made those two things into one thing and used them together. "Thomas," she said, clearly and without raising her voice. "We're leaving now. You're going to let us leave. And then I am going to fix this." The shape in the trees withdrew. The pressure in the air released. The path ahead was open. She took her brother's hand, and they walked out of the Blackwood without looking back. The church was locked. Eleanor picked the lock with a kit she carried professionally and never discussed. Inside, Father Donahue was already at the altar. His vestments were on, his hands were folded, and 3 rows of candles were lit, which meant he had been there for some time. He had been expecting them. Eleanor noted this with the portion of her mind that noted everything and said nothing about it. "You knew we'd make it back," she said. "I prayed you would," Donahue replied. "That's different." "What do you need?" she asked, setting the metal box on the altar rail. "The document, the fire, and your brother present," he told her. "The covenant was made with blood of the Voss line. It must be broken by the same." The door at the back of the church opened. Thomas came in, and Eleanor's breath caught, because he was already changing. Not fully. The moon was not yet at its peak, but the change was visible in the way the room responded to him. He seemed larger than he had that morning, and the shadows near him behaved differently, pulling toward him rather than away. His hands, when he lifted them to show her he was still himself, were broader than they should have been at the knuckles. "I don't have much time as myself," Thomas said in his own voice. "The pull tonight it's very strong." "Then we do this now," Eleanor said. The back door opened a second time. Detective Parrish stepped inside, followed by Deputy Maddox, who was already pressing himself against the wall before he had fully entered the room. "Dr. Voss," Parrish said, looking around the candlelit church with the expression of a man who has rehearsed being unflappable. "You want to tell me what's happening?" "Detective," Eleanor said, turning to face him, "I need you to listen to me carefully. I know there is no framework for what you're about to see. I know that nothing in your training or your experience has prepared you for tonight. But I need you to stand back and let Father Donahue do what he needs to do. That is the only thing I need from you right now. Can you do that?" Parrish looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at the floor. "What is wrong with that man's hands?" Parrish asked. Thomas made a sound. It was not a human sound. It rose from somewhere below speech and below breath, and it moved through the church like a stone dropped into still water. Parrish went very still. Maddox, already against the wall, simply said nothing. "Maddox," Parrish said, in a voice that had been carefully evacuated of everything except function. Sir, Maddox answered. Back against the wall, Parrish said. Already there, sir, Maddox replied. Father Donahue took the covenant from Eleanor's hands. He stood at the altar, and he began to speak, and the words were Latin, but not the Latin of Sunday services and formal rites. These were older words, the kind that existed before the church that used them, words that had been spoken over fires that had nothing to do with devotion and everything to do with bargaining with things that did not acknowledge the concept of mercy. Eleanor stood with her hand on her brother's arm. She could feel him fighting. The change moved through him in waves, like a fever breaking and returning, and each wave was stronger than the last. The temperature in the church had dropped 10 degrees in 20 minutes. The candle flames bent toward the front door in a wind that came from nowhere, and through the stained glass windows Eleanor could see the sky outside turning deep red as the full-blood moon reached its height above the Blackwood. In the forest there were lights. She would later tell herself they were the eyes of owls, or the glow of phosphorescent fungi. She would not be convincing, not even to herself. Donahue's voice rose and fell and rose again. He lifted the covenant document and held it over the altar candle, and he spoke the last words clearly and without hesitation. He put the flame to the document. It caught. The sound that came from the forest was not a sound that Eleanor had words for. It was very old and very large, and it was not pleased. The church windows shuddered in their frames. One cracked from corner to corner, a clean diagonal line splitting the glass. The fire in Donahue's hands flared upward, and for one moment, one brief, impossible moment, it burned green. Not yellow, not orange. Green, cold and bright, the color of deep forest in full summer. Then it was just ash. Thomas fell. Eleanor caught him before he reached the floor, one arm going around his shoulders, lowering him as his legs gave out. He was shaking, full-body tremors, the kind that come after great cold or great exertion, and then the shaking stopped, and he was still, and he looked up at her with eyes that were entirely his own. It let go, Thomas said, his voice rough and wondering. Ellie, it let go. I can feel it. It's not pulling anymore. I've got you, she said. I've got you. Outside, the blood moon burned red over the Blackwood. The forest was dark and still. 30 minutes later, Parrish sat in a pew with his notepad on his knee and his pen in his hand, and the look of a man composing a very difficult report in his head before committing it to paper. I have to write something, he said. I know, Eleanor agreed. A report that explains 3 deaths, he continued, with wound patterns consistent with an unknown predatory animal, which we believe has left the area. That is technically accurate, she said. Parrish pressed his pen against the notepad without writing. Dr. Voss, I watched a man's hands grow 3 inches and then go back. I watched a 400-year-old document burn green. I heard something come out of those woods that I am going to hear in my sleep for the remainder of my career. I know, she said again. Your medical determination? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. Unknown predatory animal, she said. Believed to have left the area. Parrish looked at her for a long moment. Then he wrote it down. In the corner of the church, Deputy Maddox had finished the rosary he had been saying quietly since the windows cracked. He crossed himself and sat with his hands folded and said nothing, which was, Eleanor thought, probably the correct response. Eleanor's car was packed and running when Miriam came to the door of the inn. The morning was cold and clear, the sky the bright particular blue that comes after sustained rain, and the Blackwood at the edge of town cast a long shadow westward in the early light. Will you come back? Miriam asked. Eleanor thought about it honestly. Maybe, she said. To review the historical records, if nothing else. The number of unexplained deaths going back to 1693 is significant. I'd like to document them properly. You're going to study us, Miriam said. I'm going to try to understand, Eleanor replied. Miriam nodded slowly, and it was the most respectful response that Eleanor's answer could have received. One thing before you go, the old woman said. Yes, Eleanor replied. The covenant is broken, Miriam said. The binding is gone. But the forest, she paused, looking at the tree line the way people in Herafield looked at it, which was differently from the way people elsewhere looked at trees. The forest is still there. And it is old. And it is not nothing. Whatever made that bargain 300 years ago did not sign a document because it needed a document. It signed because Aldrich Voss needed the ritual. The document was for him, not for the forest. Eleanor looked at the tree line. Is my brother safe? She asked. He's free of the covenant, Miriam said. Is my brother safe? Eleanor asked again more firmly. Miriam considered this with the careful patience of someone who had lived 81 years inside a complicated truth. Yes, she said finally. I think so. But I would suggest he doesn't come back to collect any more fungal samples. Thomas was quiet until they cleared the town limits, and then he was quiet for another mile, watching the road unwind ahead of them through the windshield. You believe it now, he said. All of it. I believe what I observed, Eleanor replied. I'm still building a framework around it. That's the most honest thing you've ever said, he told her. She didn't answer that. They drove through the long tunnel of tree canopy where the Blackwood's edge arched out over the road on both sides, and for a quarter-mile they were inside it. Inside the forest, the light coming down through the leaves in green-filtered bars, the shadows moving alongside the car in ways that did not precisely match the movement of the branches overhead. Eleanor kept her eyes on the road. Thomas watched the trees. It wasn't only horrible, Thomas said after a while. The changing parts of it were. Don't, Eleanor said. I'm only saying, he continued, that I understand why someone might not fight it. Why they might simply. Thomas. I fought it, he said. I know. I did. I'm only saying I understand the ones who didn't. Eleanor nodded once, acknowledging what he had said without answering it. Some things deserved to be heard without a response. They came out of the canopy. The sky opened wide and blue above them, and the Blackwood fell behind, retreating in the rearview mirror until it was just a dark line at the edge of the world, a suggestion, a border, a thing that waited. Thomas looked back at it once through the rear window. It's still watching, he said. I know, Eleanor replied. What do we do about that? He asked. She kept her eyes on the road and did not answer him, because she did not have an answer, and she was not the kind of person who offered words in the place of answers. The road stretched ahead of them, flat and clean and ordinary in the October morning light. Behind them, the Blackwood watched them go the way the forest had always watched, without urgency, without need, with the patience of something that had been there before the road was built and would be there long after the road was gone. Something at the edge of the treeline turned and watched until the car disappeared around the long curve of the hill. Then it turned back and went inside. The forest was quiet. The blood moon was over. And the Voss name was still written somewhere in the roots of the oldest oak, in ink that no burning had touched, in a language older than German and older than any bargain that had ever been put into words. The forest remembered. Forests always do.